I don't trust this man. Even thinking such a thing of a reverend, a servant of God, was enough to make the red creep across her cheeks and her gaze go to the floor planks. She began spooning the beans into the bowl, her shoulders slightly bowed forward with the weight of what she was thinking. He looks at me too long. I am hungry, the Reverend said to no one in particular. Ravenous would be the word. Done in just a minute, Faith assured him. Robin, would you put the cornbread on its platter? Yes, Mama. Get out the good napkins, Aaron. Yes, ma'am. He put the jar of prize marbles down on the table and went to a cupboard. Lark Lindsay glanced quickly at Reverend Burton and then away again. He was still watching her with eyes the pale blue color of water. The water of Christ, she thought her mother and father might say. But she was thinking more of frozen water, like the pond in midwinter when nothing can drink from it. She finished spooning out the beans, set the bowl on the table in front of her father. Then her mother asked her to refill the Reverend's cup of cider from the jug, so she turned her attention to that task. He had arrived about an hour ago. Lark, her father and brother, had been out in the orchard behind the barn filling up more baskets from God's bounty, when Aaron had said, Papa, somebody's on the road coming this way. It was rare to have a visitor. The nearest minister lived on the other side of Calder's Crossing, which itself was almost 8 miles south along the road. They had been overjoyed to have a guest, and Lark knew her father would take it as a sign of the beneficent grace of the Lord, which he talked about often. The land might be hard and the living a trial, Peter Lindsay said, but all you had to do to touch God in this country was to reach up, which Lark had always thought was a roundabout way of saying that if you worked hard enough, God would reward you. But sometimes that wasn't exactly true, because she remembered several years when everybody worked themselves to the sweat and the bones, and the crops were paltry, and all reaching up did was give you a withered apple from a higher branch. She refreshed the Reverend's cup of cider. He shifted his legs slightly. Beside him on the floor was his haversack. My Bible is in there, he said. I like to have my Bible right next to me, where I can get to it fast when I see a sinner coming. And Peter and Faith Lindsay had laughed a polite laugh, seeing as how some preachers did not appreciate laughter. And Aaron and Robin had smiled to hear their parents laugh, but Lark had looked at Reverend Burton's face and wondered why it was so scratched up, as if he'd been running through brambles. Mama, Mama, Robin was pulling at her mother's apron, the nice blue one with the yellow trim instead of the older, scorched one she usually wore. Is this all right? She showed that the cornbread had crumbled and fallen apart a bit when lifted from pan to platter, but they said it was just fine, dear. Upon his arrival, the Reverend had made himself comfortable in the kitchen and had told them the story of his life, how he'd grown up as a vicar's son in Manchester, and how he in his middle age had crossed the Atlantic on a vow to his father to bring salvations to the Indians. He had been among the savages for many months now, had carried the Lord's light into many heathen hearts. And oh, how he missed Manchester. England was calling him home, he'd said, there to find a new place of service and new flocks to tend. We're pleased to have you here after you traveled so long and far, Peter said, as Aaron brought the good napkins to the table. Long and far indeed, and I'm so glad to find a place to rest. I fear my feet are blistered, as these boots are just a shade small. You have some very nice boots, I see. They look comfortable. Yes, sir, they are. Been broken in well enough by now, I guess. Said the Reverend, and he took a drink from his cup. The smoky burnt smell of the ham was filling up the kitchen, as Faith always let the skin char just before she took it off the fire. Burton put his cup down and held it between both hands, and Lark could not help but take another furtive glance at his long, jagged nails. He had washed his hands and face in the kitchen bucket and scrubbed the nails with the brush too. True enough, but the Reverend smelled to Lark as if he had gone long and far without a bath. Of course, if a man of God was out in the wilderness for months carrying Christ to the Indians, then what opportunity might he have for an encounter with soap? It was ugly for her to be thinking this way, she thought. Ugly as sin to be throwing shadows on such a bright sunny day as this one had dawned. But she couldn't help it, and she thought that later, when Reverend Burton had gone, she ought to confess her sin of haughtiness or pride or suspicion or whatever it was. And it wasn't just the ragged nails that made her think of claws either. It was a strange beard of many colors, dark brown, red, chestnut brown, silver, with a streak of charcoal black across the chin. God help her cleanse her soul of this sinful thinking, Lark thought. But it was the kind of beard that Satan might grow, the devil wanting to be such a cock of a walk. Tell me, Peter, said the Reverend, as Faith and Robin began to bring the plates to the table. I passed several houses back there that looked to be deserted. There are no people nearby. My brother had a farm back that way. When his wife, rest her soul, died in '99, he took the children and went to Philadelphia. Some of those houses are older. They were empty when we came here. You know, towns rise up and fall and rise up. But it is good land here, that's for sure. And I'm hoping with the beneficent grace of the Lord that we won't be alone in this valley too much longer. But the nearest people from here would be at Calder's Crossing, sir, about 8 miles. A little hilly to get there, not bad. And I presume the road connects somewhere to the Pike? Yes, sir, on a few miles past the crossing. I presume also that Philadelphia is probably 20 or so miles from here. Near 25. Aaron, go get another chair. Faith, you and Robin sit on this side here, and Aaron can sit beside Lark. Philadelphia is my destination. From there I sail to England, said the Reverend. Faith set the ham platter at the center of the table, and alongside it the horn-handled knife, sharp enough to slice through the burnt crust. Another thing, if you please, your barn. Might you have a horse I could ride to Calder's Crossing? As I said, these boots. Oh, Reverend, we have a wagon, Faith said as she put down the bowl of baked apples and sat beside Robin. We'd be honored if you'd let us harness the team and carry you to the crossing ourselves. How delightful, Burton answered. This is truly an answer to a tired man's prayer. All the food was on the table. Aaron brought another chair and sat to the left of Lark, who had taken a seat down by her father, and was looking at Reverend Burton's black tricorn hanging on the wall hook behind him, and at the long black coat hanging on another. He'd come in with that coat, which appeared to be far too small for him, wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak. His dirty, dun-colored clothing looked to have been worn day and night for God only knew how long. Still, months in the wilderness with the heathen tribes. Reverend? Faith looked at him, her blue eyes sparkling, the sunlight through the window pane shining in her hair. Would you lead us in a blessing? I certainly shall. Let us close our eyes and bow our heads, and let me get what I need. It will take just a moment. Lark heard the Reverend open his haversack, getting his Bible, she thought. Had he seen a sinner coming? She heard a click, opened her eyes and lifted her head, and she saw Reverend Burton pull the trigger of the flintlock pistol he was aiming at her father's skull. Sparks flew, white smoke burst forth, and with a crack that rattled the panes in the sun-splashed window, a small black hole opened in Peter Lindsay's forehead, almost directly between his eyes, as he too looked up in response, perhaps, to some internal warning of disaster that was far more urgent than waiting for a minister's blessing. Lark heard herself scream, but it was not so much a scream as it was a bleat. Her father went over backwards in his chair, slinging dark matter from the back of his head onto the pine wood wall. A hand reached up, the fingers clawing. Reverend Burton laid the smoking pistol down upon the table and picked up the horn-handled knife. He rose to his feet, his chair falling behind him with a crash. He grasped the nape of Aaron's neck, and as the boy looked up at him with a mixture of shock and wonder, Aaron's mouth was open and his eyes were already dull and unfocused, like the eyes of a small creature that knows the predator is upon it. Reverend Burton drove the blade down into the hollow of the boy's throat until the handle could drive no deeper. Then he let the handle go, and Aaron slithered off the chair like a boneless, gurgling thing. The Reverend's gaze moved across the table, the hard, frozen water eyes fixed upon Faith Lindsay, who made a noise as if she'd been struck in the stomach. Her own eyes were red-rimmed and dark-hollowed. She had aged 20 years in a matter of seconds. She tried to stand up, collided with the table, and knocked over her son's jar of marbles, which rolled crazily among the platters, cups, and bowls. Then her legs collapsed like those of a broken doll. She staggered back against the wall and slid down, making a beaten, whimpering noise. "Mama!" Robin cried out. Her face had gone pasty white. She also tried to stand, and so she was on her feet when Reverend Burton's hand took hold of her head.